Some stories were never meant to be remembered. They weren't shared for attention or entertainment. These are not legends. They are not fiction. They are real experiences told by strangers on the darkest corners of the internet. What you're about to hear are true ghost stories, shared by people who never expected to be believed. Before we begin, if these stories keep you company in the dark, subscribing really helps more than you think. It motivates me to keep finding and sharing the next story. So, let's begin. Perhaps I'm too late to share this, but I feel like it needs to be told anyway. When I was younger, my aunt married into a relatively well-off English family. They owned part of a large mansion house near Myler, Cornwall, a quiet rural coastal area in the south of England. It was almost the perfect location. The house was built into the side of a hill, facing directly toward the sea. Beautiful, isolated, and quietly unsettling. The house had once been a guest house, and for as long as anyone could remember, locals had described it as haunted. During renovations, builders claimed they had seen the ghost of a woman in an old-fashioned dress, slowly walking down the stairs. At the time, I didn't know why the house had such a reputation, and honestly, I had never experienced anything strange myself until one summer. I brought my girlfriend at the time with me, and we stayed in a bedroom on the ground floor. The room didn't have its own bathroom, so if you needed the toilet, you had to leave the room, walk across the hallway, and use the one opposite. In the middle of the night, my girlfriend woke me and quietly said she was going to the loo, and that she'd be back in a moment. Half asleep, I sat up, mumbled okay, and lay back down. She didn't turn on the lights, but in the darkness, I could still make out her opening the door, leaving the room, and closing it behind her. I closed my eyes. About a minute later, I heard the door open again. I heard someone walk into the room. Assuming it was my girlfriend, I didn't open my eyes. I shifted slightly, making room for her in the bed. I felt someone climb in beside me. When I reached out, it felt like the body of a woman. Then I heard a voice, a woman's voice, not my girlfriend's. She asked, "Are you going to come tomorrow?" The moment I realized it wasn't my girlfriend, I opened my eyes. At that exact moment, my girlfriend opened the bedroom door. I looked beside me. There was no one in the bed. I bolted upright, completely shaken. My girlfriend spent the next hour calming me down as I tried to explain what had just happened. The next day, I told my uncle everything and asked why the house was considered haunted. He laughed and said I had probably encountered the ghost of someone who once stayed there. Then he explained. In the early 1900s, there had been a terrible boating accident in this part of Cornwall. A ship called the MV Darlwine disappeared completely, along with more than 30 passengers. Many of those passengers had been staying at the guest house. That was why locals believed the house was haunted by the spirits of people who never made it home. After hearing that, I could only explain what happened as the ghost of one of those passengers, asking if I was going to join them on their ill-fated boat trip the next day. Safe to say, I avoided boats for the rest of that visit. Some encounters don't come with fear. They come with something much heavier. This is one of them. My best friend and I spent many years working together as hospice nurses. We learned early on that death doesn't always arrive quietly. Sometimes it arrives with intention. One of my very first patients was a man I'll call Joe. Joe had cancer, but he wasn't afraid of dying. His wife had passed away in the same home a year or two earlier, after her own battle with cancer. Joe believed he was only waiting to see her again. He lived alone, no family, still fiercely independent. He walked all over town, cooked his own meals, and refused to let the illness take more from him than it already had. The week of Thanksgiving, I scheduled extra visits just so he wouldn't be alone. 2 weeks later, I was called out for a visit because Joe couldn't stop vomiting. When I arrived, something was wrong. He was still walking, still talking, but his color was changing. His skin was beginning to mottle. His body was weakening even as he tried to stand tall. I begged him to go to the hospital for comfort, for answers, for help. He said no. He told me he would not die in a hospital. He would die at home. Before I left, he hugged me. He had never done that before. He thanked me and said he had truly enjoyed our time together. It felt final, and I knew it. The next day, my best friend was scheduled to see him. She tried calling, and Joe didn't answer. After finishing her other visits, she drove to his house anyway. When she arrived, the door was unlocked. The television was still on, louder than usual. She hesitated before going inside. Later that afternoon, she called me. Her voice was shaken. She told me she had found Joe. He was gone. His bed was turned down as if he had been getting ready for sleep. Dinner was still on the stove. An empty plate sat on the counter. The television was still playing. He had died alone. The details were difficult, and out of respect, I won't share them. But it was clear he had not gone peacefully. For a long time, I blamed myself. I wished I had pushed harder. But deep down, I knew Joe had chosen this. He wanted to die in the same home his wife had died in. My friend was deeply traumatized by what she found. But the next day, something happened that changed everything. She called me early that morning. She told me she had dreamed about Joe. In the dream, she was back in his house. Joe was standing by his recliner in front of the television. He looked calm. He hugged her. He told her he was sorry she had to be the one to find him. He said he wished it hadn't been one of us. Then he thanked her, and he said goodbye. When she finished telling me, neither of us spoke for a long time. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. That experience changed us. The following week, we both started going to church, and we never stopped. It's been over 5 years, and we've only found more reasons to believe that this world is not the end, that our souls are connected by something higher, something we may never fully understand. I know this sounds like something out of a movie, but this is exactly what happened to me about 24 years ago. At the time, I was newly married, and my husband and I had just moved into a townhouse-style apartment. Our unit sat on the second and third floors of the building. Directly beneath us, on the ground floor, were the management office and the mailboxes. That detail matters. The woman who managed the building was older, bitter, and careless with the property. She spent most of her days sitting in her office, chain-smoking Camel non-filters. She hated us. She accused us of lying when we moved in, claiming she didn't want families with children in that unit. She made cruel remarks about my husband because of his race. Living there felt like being constantly watched by someone who resented your existence. After our baby was born, I stayed home full-time. No car, no nearby friends. Just me, the apartment, and a 9-month-old who could turn any meal into a disaster. One afternoon after lunch, it was time for a bath. I went upstairs and ran the water. The baby sat happily in one of those suction cup bath seats, splashing and laughing. It was the middle of winter. We had no heat. It was an ongoing battle with management, just like the arcing ceiling fan and the garbage disposal barely held together with duct tape. To survive the cold, we relied on space heaters. I brought one into the bathroom and placed it on the counter, well out of reach of the tub. I was standing in the bathtub, getting ready to lift the baby out. That's when the heater started to rock, back and forth. It hadn't been moving before. The moment I saw it, a wave of dread hit me. Not fear. Dread. I knew instantly that I couldn't get both of us out in time. I grabbed the bath seat, pulling it loose, and dropped the baby over the side of the tub onto the bathroom floor. At the same moment, the heater reached the end of its cord. It slammed into the shower door, bounced off the tub, and landed on its side just inches away. Then it shut itself off. When I looked toward the corner of the bathroom, something changed. That part of the room grew darker. Not from smoke, not from shadows. There were no windows, no change in lighting. It was as if the darkness itself was thickening. Then I smelled cigarette smoke, strong, heavy, Camel non-filters. The smell filled my chest and made me cough, but there was no visible smoke anywhere, and with it came something else, a presence, hatred, pure malice, like someone was standing there staring at me with absolute contempt. I grabbed my baby, wrapped him in a towel, and ran downstairs. I couldn't go back up. I stayed on the ground floor for the rest of the day, holding him close, afraid to leave him alone and terrified to bring him back upstairs. When my husband came home, he asked why the baby wasn't dressed. I told him everything. The heater, the darkness, the smoke. He went upstairs to check. There was nothing. No electrical damage, no smoke, no smell. He placed the heater back on the counter and turned it on. It didn't move. Not once. Later that day, we heard shouting downstairs near the mailboxes. That's when we learned what had happened. The building manager had suffered a massive heart attack earlier that afternoon. She was found dead in her office, still sitting in her chair. A Camel non-filter cigarette burned down between her fingers, directly beneath our apartment. I've never publicly shared this story. Only a few friends know about it. Even now, my boyfriend and I rarely talk about it, because what happened that night still feels impossible. I lived it, and I still don't fully believe it. This happened in early 2016. One night, a group of us went to a concert together. Nothing strange, nothing unusual, just friends, music, and a long night that was supposed to end quietly. Afterward, we went back to one of our places to hang out. Someone in the group started passing around crystals and stones. Harmless at first. Then he brought out an amethyst crystal. He said it was over 300 years old, passed down through his family for generations. One of the girls reached out and picked it up. The moment it touched her fingers, everything changed. Her face went blank. Her eyes darkened, completely dilated, almost black. She stared at us with a look that didn't belong to her. Then, she started speaking. Not normally. Her words sounded twisted, backward, wrong. Almost immediately, two people in the room became violently sick. They started vomiting and had to leave. The girl stood up. She sneered at us. She began saying things she shouldn't have known. She accused someone in the group of cheating, with another person standing right there in the room. The air turned thick, heavy. Objects began moving. Doors slammed on their own. Something was happening around her, and yet she seemed fully aware, not unconscious, not lost, present. A few of us left the room to figure out what to do. While we were talking, one of the guys laughed it off. He said she was crazy. The moment he said it, there was a deafening crash outside. A massive sheet of ice fell from the roof and smashed directly onto his windshield, shattering it completely. No one laughed after that. When the night finally slowed down, we realized something worse. We were supposed to sleep in the same house as her. We refused. We stayed upstairs. She stayed downstairs. For hours, we heard noises coming from below. Metal scraping, fingers tapping against a table, hysterical crying that suddenly turned into laughter, then silence. We thought it was over. My boyfriend opened his phone and checked Facebook. The very first post on his feed was from her. It had been posted 5 minutes earlier. It read, "Congratulations, you've awoken the dragon." As those words sank in, we heard footsteps. Not human footsteps. Heavy, padded, slow. Like something large climbing the stairs. Step by step by step. It sounded like a massive reptile dragging itself upward. My blood went cold. She always carried around a small stuffed lizard. She named it Jerry Garcia. We gathered enough courage to look over the staircase railing, just as the sound reached the final steps. There was nothing. Nothing at all. No one. No movement. We stayed frozen there until morning. When the noises finally stopped, we crept downstairs. The house looked wrong. Every cabinet was open, every door was open, even the basement, even the front door. The girl was gone. Later, we found strange memorabilia and relics hidden in the basement. I've left out details. Too many to tell. That night lasted hours, and it never truly ended for us. I don't know what happened, whether it was something paranormal, something ritualistic, or someone capable of something far darker. All I know is this. That night, we were not alone. Some places don't feel haunted right away. They feel old, like the land remembers something it hasn't finished dealing with. This happened in West Virginia, deep back country. Not near a town, not near help, just forest, creek water, and train tunnels that cut through the hills like scars. We were 17. It was 2004. 4 of us camping one last time before graduation, before life scattered us in different directions. The land had a history. A mother and her son drowned in the creek nearby. An old man hanged himself from a dead tree that leaned out over the water. Years earlier, laborers had died building the train tunnels, buried in a forgotten graveyard near the tracks. We knew all of this. We still went. Night came fast. The fire was going. The woods were quiet in that way that feels too quiet, like the forest is listening. My cousin and I walked down to the creek about 20 yards from camp. We were shining a spotlight into the water, watching fish move through the shallows. That's when we heard it. Slosh, slosh. Not random, not splashing, rhythmic, measured, like footsteps. We aimed the light upstream. The water was disturbed, perfectly symmetrical, as if invisible legs were wading toward us, shin deep. When the light stayed on, it stopped. When we turned it off, slosh, slosh. It was reacting to us. That was the moment my stomach dropped. The cold, sinking realization that this wasn't an animal, and it wasn't imagination. We backed away and returned to camp without saying anything. Behind us, the sloshing reached the bank, then stopped. The others heard it too. They laughed it off. Fish, maybe. Then the tall grass around our campsite began to move. Something unseen ran the perimeter of our clearing, fast enough to bend the foliage in a clean, circular path. Too fast. Then the voice started. Not loud, not shouting. Close. Too close. It sounded like a man speaking directly into each of our ears. Always the left one. At first it was garbled, broken. Then the words became clear. You shouldn't be here. A pause. You need to leave. Then firmer. You need to leave. We thought someone was walking up on us, and that's dangerous out there. No one moved. Fear locked us in place. Then adrenaline hit. We ran for the ATV, and that's when we saw him. He was already there. A tall black figure leaned casually against the front of the ATV, like he'd been waiting. He wore a hat. When we froze, he straightened slowly and looked at us. No face, no features. His legs didn't end. They dissolved into wavering lines like heat distortion above a fire. The night behind him seemed darker where he stood. The girl screamed, and he was gone. Not walking, not running, zipping back toward the train tunnels in a blink. When we tried to start the ATV, the engine struggled. The battery felt drained. We left. A month later, my uncle, the landowner, was hunting raccoon on the hill at night. A rock fell from above and struck his neck. He was paralyzed. Doctors never understood how he managed to get himself back onto his ATV and drive out. Years passed. Around Halloween, my story resurfaced in local Facebook groups. That's when my uncle texted my mother. He said he'd never told anyone this, and probably never would again. The man in the hat the kid saw that night helped me back onto my ATV. For years, I thought that thing had chased us away. Now I wonder if it was warning us, because something else was already there, something the forest didn't want us to meet. This isn't my story. It happened to my mother long before I was born, about 40 years ago, when she was still living in the Philippines. She had just returned home from a funeral with her cousin and her two brothers. They only planned to bathe, change clothes, and leave again. The heat that day had been unbearable. The moment they stepped inside the house, the temperature dropped. Not slowly, not gradually. Instantly. It felt as if someone had turned on an air conditioner and pushed it far past its limit, freezing the entire house in seconds. Every single person felt it at the same time. That alone made no sense. There was no air conditioning. Not in that house. Not at that time. They laughed it off, telling themselves it was just exhaustion or imagination. Then they heard running upstairs. Fast, hurried footsteps moving back and forth across the floor. That didn't make sense either. Everyone else was still at the funeral. They followed the sound with their eyes as it moved toward the staircase, expecting someone to come down. Instead, an empty plastic bag floated into view. It drifted gently, slowly, down toward the first step. But when it touched the staircase, it didn't sound light. Every time it hit a step, it made a heavy, solid sound. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Like someone wearing heavy work boots stomping down the stairs. Before the bag even reached the floor, all of them ran. They didn't go back. Years later, I had an experience of my own. I went on a ghost hunt with some friends at a local aviation museum. I didn't expect anything to happen. The building was relatively new, and there was nothing about the area that felt historic or ominous. Most of the exhibits had been donated by people who spent their lives flying these planes. That was it. Still, strange things began happening almost immediately. Throughout the night, I kept seeing people running along the upper balcony. They would dart behind walls and exhibits, peeking out like they were watching us. At first, I thought they were kids messing around. I even called out to them. That's when a guide asked who I was talking to. We were the only people in the building. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else there. I told myself it was echoes, reflections, my imagination filling in gaps. Then we moved into a smaller, isolated area where an airframe sat pulled from a lake decades after crashing. Someone suggested trying the Estes method. I volunteered. The moment the headphones went on, something felt wrong, deeply wrong. It felt like I had been submerged in ice water, up to my ears, for hours. I couldn't stop shaking. My hands trembled so badly, they hurt. This made no sense. The building was warm. The heater was cranked high. It was midwinter in the Canadian prairies, and I normally run so hot I sweat in freezing temperatures. Everyone else was uncomfortable from the heat. I was freezing. While under the headphones, I repeated words as I heard them through the spirit box. Every time I spoke, my friends jumped. When the session ended, one of my friends touched my hand. She recoiled instantly. My hands were ice cold, not chilled, not cool, ice cold. Within minutes of stepping away, the feeling vanished. I was sweating again like nothing had happened. That wasn't the end of it. We decided to try the ST method again in another area. This time, my friend went under, and I stayed outside. That's when it started happening to me directly. She would say things like, "I'm going to touch you." And suddenly, I would feel someone grab my sleeve and yank it hard. I felt sharp slaps on my hands and shoulders, enough force to hurt, enough to leave bruises the next day. Then, as I stood up to move away, something grabbed my ponytail and pulled. Hard. I spun around and asked my friend if she did it. She looked genuinely confused. Why would she? That was when I was done. I didn't care what it was. I didn't care what explanation existed. I just wanted out of that building. This happened more than a decade ago. I was a college student then. Final exams had just ended, and we had to move out of the university hostel. 2 friends and I rented a room close to campus. It was summer break, and both of them went back to their hometowns. I stayed. I wanted to work during the holidays and earn some money. The landlord lived on the ground floor. We lived on the top floor, 3 separate rooms. We had taken the largest one. For the first week, nothing unusual happened. Then I found a job. A few days in, I realized something was wrong. The recruitment company I worked for was a con. They targeted poor, uneducated people desperate for work. They took donations from them, then forced them into commission-only sales jobs. When those people realized the truth, they would call the company non-stop. We were told never to answer. Their numbers were blocked. One day, a call came through from a different number. I picked up. The man on the other end had pawned his wife's jewelry to get that job. He screamed at me. He cursed me. He cursed my future children and their children after them. I could only apologize. I hung up the phone, shaking. That night, I came home exhausted. I ate a simple dinner, sandwich, and milk, put on Shutter Island, and fell asleep before the movie ended. All doors and windows were shut. That's when the dream started. I was wearing a black dress, a pearl choker around my neck. I stood in front of a mirror in a dark room. As I stared at my reflection, my face began to change. It twisted. It warped. It became something inhuman. And in the dream, I began choking myself with the pearls. I woke up suddenly. The room was pitch black, and I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it, a presence, standing right beside me. I'm not a nervous person. I've had sleep paralysis before. This wasn't that. I lay still, gathering my thoughts. Then I felt something touch my arm, a fingernail, lightly scraping my left forearm. Slow, curious, deliberate. My body froze. Then instinct took over. I jumped out of bed, switched on every light, and screamed for whatever was there to show itself. Nothing. I checked my phone. 4:10 a.m. Then I looked at my arm. There was a red mark, about 1.5 inches long, 0.5 centimeter wide. The skin wasn't broken. It didn't burn. It didn't itch. But it wouldn't wash off. It stayed. I felt marked, like a warning. I didn't sleep in that room again. I went to my neighbor's place and slept in the same bed. Even then, the nightmares followed. In my dreams, the person beside me would turn bald, naked, demonic, trying to devour me. The next morning, I packed up. I left, quit the job, went home. For years after that, I couldn't sleep properly. I had never been afraid of the dark before. After that night, I slept with the lights on, especially when I was alone. Sometimes I would wake up at exactly 4:10 a.m. The mark on my arm stayed for weeks, then slowly faded, like an old scar. I'm a skeptical person, evidence-driven. But no matter how hard I tried, I could never explain what happened that night. I know something was there. I felt it, like when someone stands right next to you. Even now, years later, I still think about it. I trust my instincts more than ever. If a place feels wrong, I keep my distance. I still sleep with a nightlight, and my cats react fiercely to strange sounds. That helps. I don't try to rationalize it anymore. I used to believe the paranormal was nonsense. Not after that night. I've had several strange experiences in my life, but there was one that I could never explain away. One where I knew I wasn't imagining things. One where I knew something had followed me home. It started after a paranormal investigation. Nothing unusual happened while I was there. I spent most of the night taking photos, especially in the basement. As I was leaving, I noticed a cat sitting in an upstairs window. Without thinking, I smiled, said, "Ooh, kitty," and took a picture. Later that night, I went through the photos. The basement shots were full of orbs. That didn't surprise me. I assumed it was dust. But one photo stood out. There was a large orb and a smaller one beside it. Then I opened the photo of the cat. Right next to the cat in the window was the same thing, a large orb and a smaller one. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't feel anything strange when I got home. Nothing felt wrong. Not at first. Soon after, I started noticing things. A little boy, just glimpses, peeking around corners. A man, blonde, maybe in his 30s, always fleeting. I would hear someone standing in the kitchen when no one was there. The sound of weight shifting, jeans brushing together, the slow creak of wood beneath invisible feet. Once, while doing dishes, I felt someone standing directly behind me. I turned quickly. A blur moved away. I turned the other direction. Another blur. I was unsettled, but I didn't panic. I'd had experiences before. I didn't know what this thing wanted. Then it crossed a line. It was late at night. My toddler sons were asleep upstairs. I was downstairs in the living room, gaming, trying to relax. Suddenly, one of my sons screamed. Not cried, screamed. Then he came running downstairs, sobbing. 30 seconds later, my younger son did the same. This had never happened before, and it never happened again. Something in me snapped. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and yelled into the darkness. I told it to leave my children alone. I called it every name I could think of. I told it I didn't care what it did to me, but if it ever touched my kids again, I would make it regret it. Then doubt crept in. Out loud, I told myself I was probably crazy, that it was nothing. The next day, I got my answer. I was sitting in the living room with my sons. No one else was home. The staircase was in full view. Then I heard it, heavy footsteps moving across the second floor. Slow, deliberate, loud, like boots walking on wood. The floor upstairs was carpeted. There was no explanation. In that moment, everything clicked. All the times I had dismissed what I saw. All the times I told myself it wasn't real. I stopped doubting myself after that. I don't anymore. I hear things now more than I see them. Sometimes in an empty house, I hear groups of people talking. I hear them standing still, shifting their weight, clothes moving, floors creaking. I believe I'm clairaudient. When my brother died in 2004, I heard him whisper my name more than once. That night, I saw his shadow in the doorway. I felt him walk toward me. I felt him lean down. I pretended to be asleep. I was terrified. He died alone in a prison cell from an overdose, and I was part of the reason he was there. I testified against him. We loved each other, and we hurt each other. I thought he might be angry. I have never regretted anything more than not acknowledging him that night, not speaking, not listening. I believe he was attached to me for a while. I think he has passed on now. My daughter once told me she dreamed of him at a playground. She said he was kind. She said they talked. It broke me. Grief never really leaves. You just learn how to carry it. I listen to near-death experience stories now. They help. I work in behavioral health in a crisis center, the kind of place my brother should have gone instead of prison. Doesn't pay much, but I owe it to him, because everyone deserves a chance, and some stories don't end when life does. This story doesn't begin with me. It begins years before I was even born. In the early 1980s, my family moved to a rural stretch of land north of Houston. Dense woods, one iron ore road, no neighbors close enough to hear you scream. My parents bought a small 2-bedroom trailer to live in while my father built our real home by hand. 6 people, thin walls, nowhere to hide from the dark. My mother was 8 months pregnant with me when the first thing happened. My father was cleaning his shotgun, something he did regularly. He was careful, meticulous. The gun had been cleared, checked, and checked again. He laid it down on the bed. It was pointed toward my mother. She remembers thinking nothing of it. She knew it wasn't loaded. She stood up to go to the bathroom, and seconds later, boom, the shotgun fired. It tore through the trailer walls and buried itself into the bed of my father's truck parked outside. No shells, no explanation. That was the moment my father, a man who didn't believe in ghosts, stopped laughing at the idea. Not long after, my oldest brother started seeing someone. He was only 6 or 7. He said there was a man sitting in the rocking chair in our living room. Always the same, dark clothes, a long coat, a hat, just watching. At night, my mother would put all the toys away and send the boys to bed. By morning, the toys would be scattered across the floor again. I slept in a crib in the living room, just feet away from that chair, and I would wake my parents screaming bloody, desperate screams night after night. My brother's experiences grew worse. He said someone played with his hair while he slept, twisting it slowly, rubbing his back. Then one night, he was thrown from the top bunk onto the floor. That was when my mother saw him too, the man, in the rocking chair. That morning, she sent all of us outside, and alone, she spoke to him. She told him he was scaring her children, that he wasn't welcome, and that he had to leave. And after that, everything stopped. Years passed. In 2012, my parents retired to a fifth wheel near Lake Livingston. Strange things returned. A CD player turning on by itself, playing my father's favorite artist, even when unplugged. A ceiling vent opening on its own, again and again and again. My father saw it too. By then, he no longer denied it. In 2019, my father died. I held his hands as he passed. Months later, my oldest brother collapsed while driving. An aneurysm. He didn't survive. 2 nights after his death, I slept in his room. When I woke the next morning, there was a large red handprint on the inside of my left arm. Not painful, just firm, like someone had been holding me there. I've never seen it again, but sometimes I can feel them. In 2022, my boxer died suddenly. 10 years old, healthy, gone in seconds. We carried his body to the car. After my husband drove away, I stood alone in the kitchen, and I heard it, the sound of him shaking his head, his heavy jowls, his floppy ears, a sound you never forget. Now his toys appear in strange places, and sometimes it feels like he's still playing, still here. I don't see them, but I feel them. And sometimes that's worse. I've shared this experience before, and I'll probably keep sharing it for the rest of my life. Not because I want attention, but because it happened. And no matter how much time passes, I still can't explain it. This isn't fiction. It isn't a campfire story. And I understand if you don't believe me. I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't seen it myself. This happened in late spring, around May or early June of 2017, in rural Kentucky. I've lived there my entire life. My family owns over 20 acres of land, fields, woods, a creek that cuts through the property. I've walked that land more times than I can count, day and night, alone and with others. Nothing strange had ever happened there before. That's important, because what I felt that day was completely new. I had just bought my first rifle, nothing unusual, just something I'd saved up for. I wanted to sight it in, and I preferred shooting on our own land instead of a public range. So I grabbed my gear and headed out toward the field. To get there, you have to cross a barbed wire fence, then walk through about 300 feet of woods. The moment I stepped over that fence, everything changed. There was no sound, no movement, no visible threat. But something felt wrong. Not fear at first, more like resistance, like the air itself was telling me I didn't belong there that day. I told myself it was nothing. The woods can play tricks on you. Wind, pressure, imagination. So I kept walking. With every step deeper into the trees, the feeling grew heavier, like being watched. Not casually, but intentionally. Halfway through the woods, the sensation became unbearable. I stopped. My instincts were screaming at me to pay attention. I hadn't loaded my magazine yet. I'd planned to do it once I reached the field. But something inside me said, no, do it now. So I stood there, alone in the woods, and loaded the round slowly. That's when the smell hit me. It came out of nowhere. A heavy, rotten stench like decay that had been sitting in the heat for weeks. I turned around, expecting to see a carcass nearby. There was a mangled animal behind me, maybe a rabbit or a possum, but it looked fresh. The smell didn't match what I was seeing. Whatever I was smelling, it wasn't that. I finished loading, secured the magazine, and kept going, though I still don't understand why. I was almost out of the woods. I could see the field ahead. That's when I heard it, a large splash coming from the creek beside me. I turned, and I saw something I will never forget. It stood upright, 8, maybe 9 feet tall. It moved silently, except for the water dripping from it. Long arms, long legs. Its body was thin, unnaturally thin, like stretched skin pulled tight over bone. Its color was pale, almost gray-brown, like something that hadn't seen sunlight in a long time. It didn't run. It didn't charge. It simply walked away from me, on 2 legs, never once turning its head. Every part of me knew I was looking at something that should not exist. I tried to chamber around, slowly, carefully. The rifle failed. The magazine jammed in a way it never had before and never did again. It was as if, in the one moment I might have needed it, it refused to function. And then the creature was gone. No sound, no trace, just silence, and the feeling that I had been spared. I stood there shaking, realizing that if I had fired, I would have deafened myself. I hadn't even put on hearing protection. Eventually, I turned around and left. I didn't finish what I came there to do. I never told my family. But later, strange things followed. Small things. Like my father suddenly burning sage around the house, saying he liked the smell, even though he never had before. Years later, I learned something else. A Trail of Tears site lies just a few miles from that land. Native artifacts have been found on our property. Arrowheads, flint, signs that people lived and suffered there long before us. I don't know what I saw. I don't know why it didn't hurt me. All I know is this. That land felt ancient, alert, aware. And that day, something was watching me and chose to let me leave. When I started college, my mother and younger sister moved into an old house deep in the woods of Mississippi. Getting there felt like traveling backward in time. A 4-lane highway became 2 lanes. 2 lanes became gravel. Gravel became dirt. And eventually the road disappeared entirely, replaced by 2 narrow ruts carved into the earth. Branches brushing the sides of your car as if you weren't meant to pass through. The nearest town was miles away. And beyond that, nothing but forest. The house itself was old, built sometime in the 1920s. A simple shotgun-style home with a concrete porch, a small yard, and woods stretching endlessly in every direction. No air conditioning, just an attic fan that hummed steadily through the heat. It was cheap, remote, and according to my mother, the moment she stepped onto the property, it felt like home. Not just comfortable, not just familiar, but welcoming. When I visited for the first time, I felt it too. A strange sense of peace. Like the house was happy you were there. Like someone you loved might walk through the door at any moment. I visited often after that, especially when school felt heavy. The place felt like rest. One night, while sitting in the living room, I overheard my mother and sister in the kitchen talking about the Indians. It sounded casual, almost fond, like they were discussing neighbors. Later, I asked what they meant. My mother smiled and said, "Oh, sometimes we see people running through the backyard. Your sister calls them Indians. They just look like children playing to me. We only ever see them through the window. If you go outside, there's never anyone there." She told me other things too. That at night, when she went to bed, she felt as if the house was tucking her in. Not physically, just a deep sense of being cared for. And sometimes she'd see lights in the front room. Not headlights, no cars, just glints, reflections, as if someone were shining light into the windows from nowhere. None of it felt threatening. None of it felt wrong. Until one night. It was late. I was sitting alone on the front porch watching the stars. The kind you only see when there's nothing else around for miles. The attic fan hummed behind me. The woods were alive with sound. Crickets, cicadas, that constant layered noise that never really stops. Then I noticed it getting louder, then much louder, and then everything stopped. All at once, no insects, no fan, no wind, just silence. Not the peaceful kind, the unnatural kind. I could hear my own breathing, my feet shifting on the porch. And then something else began. A faint, rhythmic sound, a low whoom, whoom, like a heartbeat. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. I stepped off the porch into the yard, and that's when I felt it. The ground itself was pulsing, soft, steady, as if the earth beneath me was breathing. It moved through my ankles, my legs, up into my chest. The whole world felt alive, beating slowly, patiently. I don't know how long it lasted, but when it stopped completely. And then, just like before, the insects returned. The fan resumed its hum. The night went on. I went inside and went to sleep. My mother moved out while I was away that summer. She later told me she mentioned the strange experiences to the owner. The woman had gone quiet, uncomfortable, unwilling to talk about it. Years later, the land was sold. The house is likely gone now. But sometimes I wonder, not what haunted that place, but what lived there that simply didn't mind us staying. There's a version of this story somewhere on Reddit already. I wrote it years ago. At the time, I didn't believe in anything paranormal, and honestly, I still don't. But what happened in that building didn't happen to just one person. My husband and I owned a martial arts school, and the building it was in, which we also owned, was over 130 years old. It stood beside a church. The price was low for a reason. The place was worn down, drafty and loud in the way old buildings are. Creaking floors, cold air slipping through walls, outdated wiring we had to replace by hand. We did most of the renovations ourselves. No working bathrooms at first, bare floors, dust everywhere. Still, once we moved in, strange things began happening. When we worked with drills or electric saws, I would sometimes hear the soft tinkling of a music box. It was faint, delicate, almost shy. I'd stop everyone and ask if they heard it too. No one ever did. I assumed it was music from the church next door. Sound travels oddly through old walls. My husband experienced something different. Several times while he was alone in the building, he heard a woman's voice calling his name from the bottom of the stairs. Each time, he assumed it was me returning from work. He would call back, asking me to come upstairs. The building was empty. This happened 4 or 5 times. Then, there were the nights. One evening, in the small apartment connected to the large second-floor hall, we woke to the sound of sweeping. A broom moving slowly across wooden floors. My husband got up to check. The moment he stepped into the hall, the sound stopped. When he returned to bed, it started again. That cycle repeated 3 more times. We blamed animals. We had found mummified squirrels in the attic before. It felt like a reasonable explanation. Until it didn't. One afternoon, we were hosting a barbecue in the backyard. I went inside to grab more utensils. There were 2 ways up. A metal stairwell from the yard, and the main entrance staircase. I took the main stairs. As I reached the second floor, I heard footsteps pacing back and forth at the far end of the hall. I assumed my husband had come up the other way. It was dark. I couldn't see anyone. I called out to him. The pacing stopped. No answer. Then it started again. Annoyed, thinking he was playing around, I flipped on the lights. Every utensil from the shelf near where the pacing came from crashed onto the floor at once, like something had been startled. There was nothing there, not even an animal. The moment that stayed with me the longest happened on a Saturday morning. I was sitting on the couch in the apartment, half focused on a game on my tablet. The stereo sat directly in front of me. It clicked on by itself. A girl's voice began speaking. I assumed my husband had turned it on from his computer. He often played music before teaching his morning class. I wasn't really listening. Until the voice said something that made my skin tighten. It was introducing itself, a name, an age, where she was from. Then, after a pause, "Something's hurting me." I looked up. "Something's killing me." Something killed me. I stood up. The voice continued calmly, asking someone to tell her parents, her teachers. Then she mentioned a corrections officer. I ran into the other room, furious, convinced my husband was playing a terrible joke. He had no idea what I was talking about. When he showed me the stereo, it wasn't plugged in. After that, I asked our live-in student who stayed in the basement apartment with his girlfriend if they'd noticed anything strange. They exchanged a look. Then they told me everything. One night, while the student was working overnight, his girlfriend woke to footsteps coming down the stairs. Their door opened, then closed. A bright flashlight shone into her face. She assumed it was her boyfriend. Recognized the shape, the height, the jeans. She swatted at him, annoyed, when she finally turned on the lamp. No one was there. They also heard footsteps upstairs when the building was empty. They had a pet mouse at the time. Whenever the footsteps happened, the mouse panicked, flipping wildly in its enclosure. But during classes, when people filled the building, the mouse stayed calm. One day, while they were play wrestling, their African gray parrot suddenly froze, its feathers puffed up. In a sharp, alarmed voice, it asked, "Who's there?" The student joked and ran toward the door. As he did, every book on the shelf in front of him fell over. The lights flickered. The animals lost control, throwing themselves against their cages. Years later, another live-in student experienced something quieter. He would wake up unable to find his phone. He always placed it beside his bed. After searching the room, he would find it outside his locked bedroom door, perfectly placed. Nothing notable has happened since, but no one has stayed overnight there in years. Maybe it was faulty wiring, old walls, or something in the air. Maybe it was mold, or maybe it was just a building that remembered being lived in. I've never been someone who scares easily. I grew up in a noisy house, learned to sleep through storms, traffic, shouting neighbors. Silence was never comforting to me. It always felt like something unfinished. That's probably why I took the night shift. I worked as a security guard for a private housing complex on the edge of town. Not abandoned, not dangerous, just old. The kind of place built in the late 1970s, concrete walls, narrow stairwells, identical balconies stacked on top of each other like shelves. Most residents were elderly. The rest were people like me, quiet, passing through life. My shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. For the first few months, nothing happened. I did my rounds, checked doors, logged temperatures, watched security monitors that showed the same empty hallways hour after hour. Then one night, around 2:17 a.m., I noticed movement on camera 4. It showed the third-floor hallway of Building C. Someone was standing there, just standing. The camera quality was poor, grainy in low light, but I could make out a human shape, tall, facing the wall. I waited. People sometimes wandered the halls at night. Insomnia, bathroom trips, loneliness. But this figure didn't move. After about 3 minutes, I picked up my radio and announced myself over the building intercom, asking if anyone needed assistance. No response. I watched as the figure slowly turned its head toward the camera. The face wasn't clear, but the movement was deliberate. Then the feed cut to static. That happens sometimes too. Old wiring. I logged it and continued my shift. The next night, the same thing happened. Same hallway, same time. This time, the figure wasn't facing the wall. It was facing the camera already, standing directly beneath the emergency exit sign. I zoomed in. The face still wouldn't resolve properly, like the camera refused to focus on it. But I noticed something new. It wasn't blinking. I called my supervisor in the morning. He told me the cameras in Building C had always been unreliable and suggested I stop overanalyzing shadows. I tried. A week later, residents began calling the front desk. Complaints about footsteps in the hall at night, about someone standing outside their door, not knocking. One woman said she heard breathing through her peephole. Maintenance found nothing. Then the knocking started. Soft, slow, always 3 taps. It was never aggressive, never urgent, just patient, always around 2:17 a.m. One night, I decided to go up to Building C myself. I brought my flashlight and radio and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The hallway was empty. The lights hummed faintly. The carpet smelled like dust and old cleaning solution. As I walked, my footsteps sounded too loud. Halfway down the hall, I noticed something strange. Every apartment door had a small scuff mark near the handle, except one. Apartment 3C17, the door looked newer, cleaner. I checked the resident log. 3C-17 was listed as vacant, had been for over a year. At exactly 2:17 a.m., I heard footsteps behind me. Not fast, not slow, measured. I turned around. The hallway was empty, but my radio crackled. Not with voices, with breathing. Close. I backed away toward the elevator, never turning my back again. The next morning, I requested a transfer. My supervisor laughed it off, but approved it anyway. Before my last shift ended, I checked the incident reports for Building C. There was an entry dated 13 months earlier. A wellness check. An elderly man in 3C-17 hadn't been seen in days. When responders arrived, they found him standing in the hallway, facing the wall. He had been dead for several hours. Cause of death, heart failure. Time of death, approximately 2:17 a.m. I don't work nights anymore, but sometimes when my apartment is quiet, I hear 3 soft knocks, and I don't check the door. I grew up around woods, so I never thought of them as scary. They were just there. Trees behind the house, trees along the roads, trees swallowing old barns and fence lines. When my wife and I bought the property, that familiarity was actually what sold us. 10 acres in rural Pennsylvania, mostly forest, a narrow gravel drive, no visible neighbors. The realtor described it as quiet, in a way that felt honest, not salesy. There was an old hunting cabin near the back of the land. Collapsed roof, rusting stove, nothing unusual. The survey showed a clearly marked property line running straight through the woods, flagged every 100 feet. At first, everything felt exactly how we expected. Peaceful. Still. The kind of silence that makes you sleep better. The first thing that felt off wasn't visual. It was sound. Or rather, how sound behaved. When you're in the woods, you expect noise. Birds, wind, insects. But on our land, there were stretches where everything went quiet at once. Not gradually, instantly. I'd be walking the trail we cleared behind the house, boots crunching leaves, when the woods would just stop responding. No echoes, no distant movement. Even my footsteps sounded wrong, like they were being absorbed. The silence always happened near the same place, the property line. I didn't notice it consciously at first, but my body did. I'd slow down. My shoulders would tense, like I was about to step into traffic without looking. The survey flags were old but intact, pink tape faded by sun and rain. On our side, the woods felt normal. Across the line, they didn't. Nothing dramatic, no dead trees, no strange smells, just wrong. Depth felt off. Distances didn't line up the way they should. I mentioned it to my wife once. She laughed and said, "Congratulations, you've discovered vibes." I let it go. Then the footprints showed up. They weren't human, too narrow, too evenly spaced, but they also weren't animal. No claws, no drag marks, just long, shallow impressions in the dirt, always parallel to the property line, never crossing it. I took photos thinking maybe a deer with an injury, but the spacing was wrong, and there were no prints leading away, just appearing. We started hearing something at night. Not screams, not whispers, movement. Like someone slowly walking through leaves without caring if they were heard. Always far enough away to be uncertain. Always circling. Our dog hated it. He would stand at the back door, hackles raised, staring into the trees, not barking, just watching. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on our gravel drive. Heavy, deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. Nothing. The footprints were there in the morning. They stopped exactly at the property line. That was when I noticed the survey flags were gone. All of them, cleanly removed, no tape scraps, no broken stakes, just erased. I called the county office. They said no one had requested a resurvey. I reflagged the line myself. The next morning, they were gone again. In their place, something else hung from the trees, twisted strips of bark, braided grasses, knots tied from vines, not decoration, markers. That night, the woods didn't go quiet. They went loud. Every insect, every bird, all at once. Then it stopped, and I heard breathing, right beyond the tree line, slow, patient, not hiding, waiting. I didn't shine the light. I don't know why. Some instinct told me not to acknowledge it. The next day, the old hunting cabin was different. The collapsed roof was intact. The stove was clean. A chair sat on the porch, facing our house. We moved 2 weeks later. Didn't sell, didn't argue, just left. The last thing I did before driving away was walk to the edge of the woods one final time. The property line was back, marked perfectly. And just beyond it, something had been pressed into the dirt. Words, not carved, pressed. This side is loud. When my aunt and uncle decided to sell the house, they didn't call it haunted. They just said they were tired. It was a large place, 3 stories plus a basement, and they were getting older. Too many stairs, too much upkeep, too many nights where sleep didn't come easy. At the time, my family needed more space, so we moved in. It ended up being 6 of us under one roof. Me, my mother, my grandmother, my great-aunt, her son, and my cousin. On paper, it was perfect. The house wasn't even that old. It had been custom built by a couple who poured their life savings into it. They lived there for decades, grew old together there. When the husband passed, the wife sold it. No tragedy tied to the walls. No history you'd circle on a ghost tour. And yet, my uncle refused to sleep upstairs. He kept a hospital bed in the living room and told us, more than once, that the reason was simple. "There's a shadow man," he said. "He walks the stairs after dark." We laughed it off. Nervous laughter, but still laughter. He didn't. The first night we moved in, my cousin was downstairs in the basement level floor where the bedrooms were. The rest of us were on the middle floor watching TV. We heard the downstairs door open and close. No big deal. We assumed he'd gone to the garage. A few minutes later, he came upstairs. He looked confused, not scared, just uncertain. He asked us very casually, "Where did the old guy go?" We stared at him. He explained that an older man had come in through the downstairs door, stood in the doorway of his room, and watched him play video games for a while. Didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. Then he was gone. That was the moment the house stopped feeling empty. There were a lot of things over the years, too many to count, but two moments still stand out, even now. The first happened one winter morning. I was alone in the house. Everyone else was out of town. My cousin was staying with his mother. The place was silent in that way houses get when you're truly alone inside them. I was in the basement level floor, sitting on the floor, playing Madden. I paused the game to send a text. That's when I heard the stairs. Not the staircase leading down to me, the other one. The one that went from the top floor to the middle floor. The stairs in that house were loud. Anyone who lived there knew the sound. You couldn't sneak up or down them. Every step had a voice. And I heard them. One step, then another. Slow, deliberate. Whoever or whatever was walking wasn't rushing. I sat frozen, controller in my hands, listening as the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Then they moved across the living room, straight to the couch, and sat down. The couch let out that unmistakable sound, air pushing out of old cushions under weight. No sudden noises, no jump scare, just the clear, undeniable sound of someone sitting where no one should have been. I didn't move until I heard nothing else. The second experience is harder to talk about. For a few months, I switched bedrooms with my grandmother after her knee surgery. She couldn't handle the stairs anymore. That put me in the master bedroom on the top floor. Attached bathroom. The bathroom itself was beautiful, modern, updated, expensive looking, but it never felt right. You had to walk down a short, narrow hallway lined with closets to reach it. The lighting was poor. There was one window positioned in such a way that no matter the time of day, it never received direct sunlight. It was always dim, always shadowed, and the entire wall above the sink was a mirror, floor to ceiling. Every night, I rushed through brushing my teeth. I never lingered. None of us did. That walk-in shower barely got used in years. Then one night, I bent down to spit. When I looked back up, there was someone standing behind me. I saw it in the mirror first. A dark figure. Close. Too close. I screamed and turned around instantly. For a split second, I saw it again, right in front of me. Then it was gone. The entire thing lasted maybe a second, but the fear stayed much longer. I never used that bathroom again. Not once. I grabbed my toothbrush the next morning and used the downstairs bathroom from then on. Everyone who lived in that house left with a story. Shadows moving where they shouldn't. Sleep paralysis. Footsteps with no source. But only twice did anyone actually see something. And honestly, that was more than enough. People say they want to live in a haunted house. They don't. Not really. Because it's one thing to visit a place like that. It's another to explain months later why there are toothpaste splatters halfway up a mirror you refuse to go near. I work as a wildlife surveyor. It's not the kind of job people imagine when they think science. There's no lab coat, no dramatic discoveries. Most days it's just hiking, taking measurements, logging animal signs, and trying not to get Lyme disease. I've spent years in forests across the Midwest and Pacific Northwest. I trust patterns, tracks, weather behavior, migration routes. If something happens, there's usually a reason. That mindset is important to understand, because what happened to me didn't start as fear. It started as confusion. This took place in northern Washington, deep in a protected woodland area, used mainly for long-term ecological studies. No trails, no campsites, no casual hikers. You had to apply for access months in advance, and even then, only a handful of researchers were approved each year. I was assigned to spend 3 weeks there, living out of a small research cabin built decades ago. The cabin wasn't abandoned, it was maintained just enough to be functional. Generator, radio, one-room layout. It sat in a clearing surrounded by old-growth forest so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground beyond 20 feet. The first few days were uneventful, peaceful even. The forest had that deep, heavy quiet you only get far from civilization. No distant highways, no planes, just wind in the canopy and the occasional snap of branches shifting. On the fourth night, something small happened. Not scary, just off. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to the sound of footsteps outside the cabin. That, by itself, wasn't unusual. Deer passed through the clearing often, sometimes coyotes. I stayed still, listening for the rhythm. 4 legs, uneven spacing, but these steps were wrong. They were slow, evenly spaced. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause, bipedal. I reached for my headlamp and clicked it on, aiming toward the small window beside the door. Nothing. No shadow, no sound, just silence so complete my ears rang. I told myself it was a black bear standing briefly on hind legs. It happens. I went back to sleep. Over the next week, it kept happening. Always between 2 and 4 a.m., always slow footsteps. Always stopping directly outside the cabin wall nearest my bed. Never circling. Never approaching the door, just standing. During the day, I found no tracks. No disturbed soil, no broken branches, and I'm trained to see that kind of thing. It was like whatever it was left no physical interaction with the environment. By day 10, I started sleeping with the radio on low volume. Not for fear, just to anchor myself to something normal. That's when the knocking started. 3 knocks. Soft, not aggressive, knock, knock, knock. The first time it happened, I froze. Every instinct screamed, don't respond. Animals don't knock. People don't knock at 3 a.m. in restricted forest land. I waited. After about 30 seconds, I heard the footsteps retreat. Same slow, deliberate pace. The next morning, I checked the door. No marks, no scratches, nothing. I radioed base and casually asked if anyone else had been scheduled in the area. The answer was no. I was alone for at least another 2 weeks. I considered leaving. But here's the thing. Nothing felt hostile. No dread, no pressure. Just a growing sense of being observed with intent. Like something was studying me the way I studied animals. The moment that changed everything happened on the 17th night. I woke up before the sound this time. That sudden awareness you get when something pulls you out of sleep without a noise. The radio was still playing softly. Then I heard my name. Not shouted, not whispered, spoken clearly from just outside the wall. It used my full name. I sat up so fast I felt dizzy. Every hair on my arm stood up. The voice wasn't distorted. It wasn't threatening. It sounded neutral, almost tired. I didn't answer. After a few seconds, it spoke again. You don't belong here. That was it. No footsteps, no knocking, just silence afterward. I didn't sleep again that night. At dawn, I packed everything. I didn't log data. I didn't take samples. I shut down the generator and left the cabin unlocked. As I stepped into the tree line, I felt something I still struggled to explain. Not fear, but relief. Like crossing an invisible boundary I hadn't known existed until I stepped back over it. I reported the incident in clinical terms. Auditory hallucination, stress, sleep disruption. Base accepted the report without question. But months later, I reviewed historical logs from that research zone. Dozens of early researchers had left before their assignments ended. Many cited unease. A few mentioned hearing movement near the cabin. One entry from the 1970s stood out. It was short, almost an afterthought. Forest seems occupied in a way that doesn't align with wildlife behavior. Feels like a space already in use. I don't think it was a ghost. I don't think it was an animal. I think there are places in this world that aren't empty, even when they look untouched. Places that don't belong to us, and never did. And I think that thing knocking on my door wasn't trying to scare me. It was asking me to leave. When I was in 8th grade, my mom and I briefly lived in a house that I still think about years later. It had only ever been the two of us. No siblings, no relatives nearby. And as a single mother, money was always tight. So when a man offered to rent her a house in a neighboring city for a price that felt almost too good to pass up, she accepted. At the time, it felt like luck. The house itself was nice. 3 bedrooms, 2 stories, a large backyard that wrapped around the back of the property. We had 4 small dogs, chihuahuas, and that yard felt like a gift. Somewhere they could run without us worrying. Move-in day was quiet, normal. We carried boxes inside, stacking most of them downstairs, telling ourselves we'd unpack slowly instead of exhausting ourselves all at once. That was when I went upstairs. I noticed it immediately. One of the bedrooms at the end of the hall was locked. Not just closed, locked. I tried the handle anyway. It didn't budge. When I asked my mom about it, she barely hesitated before saying, "The owner uses that room for storage. We're not allowed in there." It sounded reasonable enough. After all, the rent was cheap. But from the moment I heard that explanation, something inside me tightened. I can't fully explain it, but every time I walked past that door, something felt wrong. Not fear exactly, more like pressure. Like whatever was behind that door wasn't meant to be ignored. My bedroom faced the hallway, directly across from the locked room. If I left my door open, even just a crack, I felt it. That sensation of being watched. Every time I looked up, the hallway was empty. Still, quiet. But the feeling never left. As the days passed, the house stopped feeling like a house. It felt occupied. We'd hear footsteps upstairs while we were downstairs, slow, deliberate. Then, if we went upstairs, we'd hear movement below us. There were only 2 of us. The dogs noticed it before we did. They refused to go upstairs, not hesitating, not whining, refusing. We had to carry them one by one, which was strange. They usually followed us everywhere. At night, I stopped sleeping in my room. I told myself it was just nerves, just adjusting to a new place. But the truth was simpler. I didn't feel alone in there. So I slept in my mom's room instead. About 3 weeks in, something changed. Every night, without fail, the dogs began howling. Low, panicked, desperate. We'd rush downstairs to check on them and find all 4 huddled together in the corner of their gated area, shaking. They never did that before. Not once. One morning, we both woke up and just knew. Nothing had happened yet, no sounds, no movement, but the house felt heavier. My mom looked at me and said, "I want you to stay at your aunt's tonight." I asked why. She didn't answer. She just said, "Please trust me." I didn't argue. That night at my aunt's was the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks. The next morning, my mom arrived. Her car was packed full. Boxes, bags, the dogs. She looked exhausted and scared. This is what she told me happened that night. She woke up to a loud crash. The dogs were barking, frantic, non-stop. She rushed downstairs, calling out, thinking someone had broken in. That's when she saw the boxes. All of the unpacked boxes we'd left neatly stacked were scattered across the floor, as if someone had shoved them. They'd been there for weeks. They had never moved before. The dogs wouldn't stop barking. She carried them upstairs 2 at a time, locking herself in her bedroom, Once they were all inside, they finally went quiet. But they didn't relax. They stared at the door. A few minutes passed. Then she heard it, a door slamming once, twice, again. It wasn't upstairs, it was the front door, downstairs. She didn't sleep at all after that. As soon as the sky began to lighten, she packed everything she could fit into the car, loaded the dogs, and left. She spent the entire weekend moving our things out. I wasn't allowed to go back. We lived there for 1 month. That's it. About a week later, my mom confronted the man who rented us the house. She asked him if he'd ever noticed anything strange while living there. His expression changed immediately. He didn't answer. He just stood there. She handed him the keys and walked away. I don't know what was in that house. I don't know what was behind that locked door, but I know how it felt. And even now, years later, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. I can't imagine what that last night was like for my mom, alone, listening, waiting for morning. That's where we'll leave things for tonight. 16 stories, 16 moments where something felt just a little off. Maybe there was a reason, or maybe some things don't need answers to exist. As the night grows quieter, remember, you're safe right now. You're warm. You're still. And nothing is asking for your attention anymore. If any of these stories linger in your thoughts, let them drift past like distant memories, like footsteps fading down a hallway you no longer need to follow. Thank you for spending this time with me. Rest easy, sleep deeply. Good night.